in fashioning a sentence is whether and to what degree the defendant has accepted responsibility, right?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you some questions kind of designed to get at that, okay? First, I want to ask you about the various sources of information you've had access to during the investigation and then after the defendant was arrested that represent kind of sources of statements that she made, things that she said about the case, okay?
Okay.
Let's start with interviews. You interviewed her a number of times, right?
Yes, I did.
And there were some other law enforcement interviews that you didn't participate in but did watch.
Correct, yes.
You've talked to witnesses who have talked to her.
Yes.
For instance, Melanie Bowling,
Yes.
Billy Joe Howell, the defendant's mother.
Yes.
You have seen the news interview that she did during the investigation.
Yes, I have.
And have you also monitored her communications from the jail during the time that she spent there between her arrest and the trial?
I have.
Listened to many of her phone calls from the jail?
Yes.
Read emails that she sent from the jail?
Yes.
And read letters that she exchanged with a pen pal, right?
Yes.
You've also watched some video recorded, like video visits that they can do,
Yes.
sort of like a FaceTime type thing.
Yes.
Okay. So you've seen her talk a lot.
I have.
You've heard her talk a lot.
Yes.
Those various statements have included some stories about that night, right? About what happened or what might have happened.
Yes, they have.
Let's talk about the abduction story. Tell us about the abduction story or stories.
Yeah, so that initially started on October 5th. That was the initial story that she came up with was Quinton was abducted by Bubba.
And was there a version of the abduction story at some point that involved not Bubba as the alleged kidnapper, but strangers, unknown strangers?
Yes, on that first day after we had confirmation from the FBI office in Augusta that Bubba was most likely not going to be involved, she started mentioning, random vehicles that had followed her throughout the night or had stopped in front of her house, just trying to cast suspicion on those.
What about Michelle McCarta, Quinton and his siblings' babysitter? Did she ever feature in any version of the abduction story offered by the defendant?
Yes, there's a few times where she tried to say that possibly Michelle McCarta was involved.
So as to the abduction story, it's taken various forms. Bubba took him, maybe a stranger took him, maybe Michelle took him, right?
Correct.
There's also a story, or maybe multiple versions of variants on the same story, alleging that Danny was involved or Danny did it or something along those lines.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that story or stories?
Yeah. So the Danny possibly being involved started shortly after Daniel left. That was brought up in a text message to Savannah Solomon on October 24th and during our interview on the 31st of October. It's also been mentioned a number of times in our jail calls, just various versions of that story.
It has included the claim that Danny was actually the one at the dumpsters at 1:20 or so in the morning on October 5th, right?
Yeah, that was the story from October 31st. It wasn't her at the dumpster, it was actually Daniel.
There's also been a different version from her in which she suggests that, actually, no, he threw him in some other trash receptacle on his way to work after the sun had come up, right?
Yes.
And so as to Danny, two different versions of the Danny did it story, right?
Yes, it is.
At some point, did she try out something that I'll call the bathtub theory on you?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So in her final interview on November 21st, she did mention that possibly something happened to Quinton in the bathtub. That one was shortly, discarded as an untrue, theory, based on the fact that Paul got home after the bathtub. All sorts of other parties can confirm Quinton was still alive after he took a bath.
All right, so I'd like to ask you a couple questions about all these different stories, things she said, things she didn't say. First of all, as we talked about, some of these stories involve her kind of casually accusing other people or implicating other people, right?
They do, yes.
Did you ever hear from her any reluctance, apprehension, or hesitance about throwing these other innocent people's names out there as potentially being responsible?
No.
Now, remember in the news interview, and I think in the October 12th interview with Special Agent Snyder and Special Agent Solomon, she said some things about being willing to take responsibility if it came to light that she was the one who had done this, right?
She said that, yes.
In all of these statements of hers that you've listened to, the interviews, things witnesses have told you she said, jail communications and so forth, at any point, has she ever actually accepted responsibility for what she's now been convicted of?
No, she hasn't.
Now, she sometime relatively recently wrote a letter to a local news station, right?
Yes, she did.
Do you see in front of you a document marked as State's Exhibit 2?
Yes, I do.
Is that a copy of that letter?
It is.
Where did that letter come from?
It is from the WTOC website, and it's signed by Leilani Simon at the bottom.
And WTOC website is they're a respected news organization, and they're posting it saying, this is a letter she sent to us.
Yes.
Right? Your Honor, I would offer this into evidence as State's Exhibit 2.
Any objection?
No objection, Judge.
States Exhibit 2 is admitted.
What's the date of this letter?
September 2nd, 2024.
So a little more than a month before trial, maybe 5 weeks before trial.
Yes.
Now that this has been admitted into evidence, could you just read it for us?
Sure. WTOC, there is no factual evidence against me, none. As in no concrete, without a doubt evidence. All the state has is speculation based on circumstantial evidence. Nothing, however, based in fact with undeniable proof/evidence. This is what the state doesn't have. No DNA evidence, no forensic evidence, no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, no camera/video evidence, no time of death to prove I was at home during tragedy, no cause of death, no proof of any previous abuse to Quinton or other children. I understand if you're skeptical of what I just wrote, but I assure it's the truth, it's fact. I implore you to do your own investigation into my claims to confirm. The public deserves to hear, to know some of the facts of this case, and not only speculation based in circumstantial evidence. I firmly believe that if the investigators weren't mainly focused on me from day one of the investigation, that they may have found the evidence they lack and therefore the actual murderer. They, in quotations, the state, are attempting to railroad me instead of admitting they have accused the wrong person for for the past almost 2 years. Leilani Simon.
Thank you. Now, is it fair to say that in that letter she's kind of holding herself out as like a detached commentator upon the state of the evidence and not like, the person who was there and threw him in the dumpster and knows exactly what happened?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Now, I'd like to ask you some questions about her behavior during the investigation. And, a lot of her behavior in the investigation was charged in the indictment in the form of false statements. I want to ask you about a couple of things that did not come into evidence at trial.
Okay.
The first is something that occurred on October 5th, right? That's day one.
Yes.
That is when the defendant, Paul Simon, and Daniel Youngkin were at the Chatham County Police Department for a fairly long period of time for a series of interviews, right?
Yes.
Was there And that was at a time very early on where she's representing to the police that Quinton has been abducted and she doesn't know whether he's safe or not, dead or alive, right?
Yes.
Was there a point where she was captured on camera asking Paul whether he had any weed to smoke when they left there?
Yes, there was.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So after everyone's individual interviews were concluded, my team was trying to arrange transport to get them back home. We had all three of them in the interview room together. During that time, Leilani asked Paul if he has marijuana at the house.
Now, moving forward from that, another incident that wasn't introduced into evidence at trial, the Stingrays incident. Okay.
Okay.
That was on October 18th, right?
Yes, it was.
And that is the day that the Chatham County Police Department announced that they believed Quinton to be dead, to be located in the landfill, right?
Yes, it was.
Can you tell us about the Stingrays incident? First of all, let me ask you this. Have you reviewed video footage from Stingrays depicting the defendant and her activities there?
Yes.
And did you interview or talk to her waiter that day, a young man by the name of Zach?
Yes, I have.
Okay. Just kind of give us the broad contours of what happened at Stingrays based on that review.
Yeah, so like you said, November 18th is when our social media liaison announced to the public that we were looking for Quinton in the landfill.
November 18th?
October 18th.
Okay.
Yeah, excuse me. And on that day, my team received notice that Leilani and her family had gone out to Stingrays, which is a bar restaurant on Tybee, and that they were out there partying. I interviewed Zach Anderson, who was their waiter at the time, and he told us about her behavior out there, how she was flirtatious. Everyone was drinking, cheersing, and seeming to have a very good time.
And he said that she consumed numerous alcoholic beverages, right?
Yes.
That she became noticeably, I guess if not drunk, at least tipsy or something along those lines.
Yes.
And that she was behaving in a flirtatious manner towards him.
Yes.
In her November 21 interview, the day of the final interview on the day of her arrest, you brought up the Stingrays incident, right?
Yes, I did.
And that was in the context of explaining to her that from your perspective, she had not behaved in a way that comported with what she was saying happened, that she's a victim of an abduction, right?
Yes.
And did she tell you a lie in that interview about what had happened at Stingrays?
Yes, she did.
And what was that?
That she was not consuming alcohol that night.
Okay. Is it fair to say that we did not charge all of the lies that she told you as false statements in this indictment?
We did not.
I'd like to ask you about one more aspect of the defendant's behavior during the investigation, okay? At some point during the investigation, she entered some kind of a substance abuse rehabilitation program, right?
Yes,
And this was an inpatient deal
it was.
where you lived there.
Yes.
Okay. And was she kicked out at some point?
That's what we were told, yes.
Okay. And when was she kicked out?
November 21st.
That's the day of the final interview and her arrest?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Why was she kicked out of rehab?
We were told it was fraternization with the other people in rehab.
Specifically male
Yes.
patients at the facility?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to ask you a little bit about her behavior during her pretrial incarceration, like after she's arrested but before trial, okay?
Okay.
She was housed the entire time at the Chatham County Detention Center, correct?
Yes.
While there, is it fair to say she's had interactions with a number of men who are not incarcerated at that facility,
Yes, she has.
both over the phone and electronically otherwise,
Yes.
messages and so forth?
Yes.
Okay. Has she maintained a long-running pen pal relationship with a child molester incarcerated in the state of Wisconsin?
Yes, she has.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm not sure the exact start date. It was well over a year ago when they began communicating, and they regularly send letters to each other. They refer to each other as husband and wife.
And more recently, has she begun having like video visits, remote video visits with a felon, convicted felon from the Boston area, a man?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
That's one of the more recent ones. He's an individual that reached out to her saying that he wanted to be friends with her and gives her money on her books, and they have started video visitation.
And separate and apart from her interactions with those two men, has she also been accepting money put onto her books from other men around the country or even around the world, perhaps?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
There's been a few throughout the last 2 years. The most recent one, the one that she began video chatting, that's one that's saying he's going to regularly put money on her books.
So based on the on your review of the letters, the video visits, maybe phone calls as well, does she seem to be enjoying and encouraging the male attention that she's received since being arrested?
Yes, she does.
I'd like to ask you a couple of questions now about her behavior during trial. Okay. We've touched on her behavior during the investigation and her behavior during pretrial incarceration. But let's talk about the trial, okay?
Okay.
Do you remember an incident during the trial where I brought up the fact that to my eye she could be seen visibly mouthing during Talia McCarty's testimony, either something along the lines of "that's a fucking lie" or "she's a fucking liar" or something like that?
Yes.
Have you gone back and reviewed some of the broadcasted footage of this trial?
Yes, I have.
And have you located that incident in the footage available online?
Yes.
And has it been clipped into like a 1.5 minute clip and placed on a disc?
Yes, it has.
Is that what's contained on the disc in front of you, marked State's Exhibit 3?
Yes, it is.
And can you tell us, well, at this time you're going to offer that into evidence as State's Exhibit 3?
I don't care, Judge. No objection.
Okay, Exhibit 3 is admitted.
Now, Your Honor, I had intended to publish that, but there are a lot of people and equipment over here where I would set up my computer, so I'm not going to do that. But it will be in evidence for the court to review should the court see fit to do that. Without the ability to readily play it here, can I just ask you to describe what is depicted in that clip?
Sure. You can hear Talia in the background talking about Leilani's referencing Bubba and Quinton and how Quinton looks like Bubba. And then during that, it shows Leilani's face during the trial, and she's saying, "That's a fucking lie." And
did she appear to you to be talking to her lawyer when she said that?
no.
Now, did you keep an eye on the defendant throughout the trial to one degree or another?
Yes.
And did you have the opportunity to observe when, if at all, she displayed any visible emotion versus when she did not?
Yes.
What is your sense of the point in the trial where she displayed the most clear, visible emotion? I mean, aside from what we've just talked about, but I guess the emotion of sadness or being upset.
I would say the verdict would be where she was more visually upset.
What about when Quentin's dismembered foot or pieces of his skull were up on the screen in front of her, and she was looking right at them.
She didn't appear to be upset.
Now, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about, about the money associated with the landfill search.
Okay.
It's not really what this case is all about, but I do want to just put a couple things on the record about this. Have you reviewed some emails and talked to some people to get a sense for how much money the landfill search effort cost the Chatham County Police Department and the FBI, and therefore, the taxpayers?
Yes.
That includes, those expenses include things like travel and lodging for some of the FBI agents who came in from out of town to participate, right?
Yes.
Equipment, boots, Tyvek suits, all that kind of stuff.
Yes, it does.
Heavy equipment rentals,
Yes.
excavators and things like that.
Yes.
And is it fair to say that also overtime pay, right? There's a lot of overtime pay for people.
Yes.
Is it fair to say that the cost of the landfill search appears to far exceed, I'll say, $500,000?
Yes, it does.
Now, I'd like to ask you a couple questions about the impact of Quinton's murder on the community. Okay. As the lead detective for the Chatham County Police Department, have you had the opportunity to get a sense for the community impact of this case?
I would say so, yes.
And can you tell us a little bit about that?
I know my office, as well as the district attorney's office, has received phone calls from people thanking them and us for, finding justice and finding his body. I've had several people reach out to me to say how much it means that we were able to find him, really more than anything.
People in the community took an interest in this case, right?
Yes, they did.
And a lot of people seem to have come to care about Quinton that never even met him. Is that fair to say?
Yes, it is.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about the effect, the impact on some of the police officers involved in this case, okay?
Okay.
And we don't need to go into this in great detail, but is it accurate to say that a number of police officers sought out counseling services after either having been involved in the initial response to the house or having been involved in the landfill search, or both?
Yes, that's accurate.
And do you know some of those people?
Yes, I do.
One of the people in the community who was affected by this this case was Donner Johnson, right?
Yes.
And can you remind us who Donner is and what his role in the investigation and in the trial was?
Yeah, he was our point of contact for the landfill off of Little Neck. He was there with us every step of the way until we found Quinton.
Has this whole thing had an effect on Donner?
Him and his coworkers, yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Donner and I have had several conversations about what it's like for them to still work out there, knowing that part of Quinton's remains are still in the landfill. He and his team have had a tough time still working there.
Now, have they